Okay, our guests for this hour are two. Robert Omamo is a strategist, a strategic planner, and a commercial farmer, and engineer Isaac Mutemi is a politics and a policy advisor. We are talking about this book. It's The Path to Kaliech, the outside story of Dr. William Odongo Mamo. Who is William Odongo Mamo? Dr. William Odongo Mamo, a member of the first generation of Kenyan technocrats. He describes the journey in this book from the backward village of Kapio in 1928 to the heady positions of cabinet minister, senior government official in many different capacities, beginning in the 60s. Themes featuring prominently in it include the cultural milieu of his village and childhood, the challenges faced as he navigated his schooling in what was still very early days for education in Nyanza and Kenya as a whole, his transition from education to government service, and finally his travails in politics. It will be of special interest to readers keen on Kenya's transitions from a pre-industrial, pre-independence colony to an independent nation with a growing economy, but battling to reconcile its diverse political persuasions into a unified nation. William Odongo Mamo was popularly referred to as Kaliech by many people, or did he start calling himself Kaliech? So, Robert Omamo is a son to William, is a strategic planner, and he's here with us in the studio. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning.
You participated in writing of this book, and after Mzee passing, you finished the book.
Yes, indeed.
Aha. So he had already given you some words. I told you, continue from here.
Not quite. So the story of the book is that Mzee started writing the book in 1988. This was soon after the Mulolongo election of 88, when he said he was rigged out, and indeed he was rigged out of parliament. And at that point, he contemplated retiring from politics. It's at that point that he started penning down his memoirs. So the journey went on for about 20 years, intermittently, between 1988 and 2008. He never completed writing the book because now he started battling ill health, and indeed, in 2010, he passed on. So at that point in 2010, we as family had people like myself, the younger children of my father, had literally grown up with the book, because in 1988, I was in class 1. And over the years, every now and then when I would engage my dad, he would tell me, pass me my files for my book. So in between that period, I had read snippets of the book growing up. And so in 2010, a few of my older siblings who had never read the book were interested in having a look at the manuscript. Because you remember in 1988, our family is quite big and across different generations. So there are some who were already long married by then and hadn't even had a look at the book. So at that point, we sat down as a family. We used to discuss how to release the book. But then a time came, let's say between 2010 and 2012, where I seemed to be the lone voice talking about the book, which is understandable because the family is big. We're 16 children. People were in different parts of the world. And it reached a point where we could not really get things moving with the book. So then years went by. In 2017, I picked up the manuscript, read it again, and this time around it just felt different. I think maybe because I was older, I could internalize things more. And I felt like the book was speaking to me, that asking me, why isn't this book out?
Why am I not out?
Why? Yeah, because there were so many things I could relate to in the book at that time. And I pondered over it, but I didn't know how to start. I procrastinated because going back to the family meant it would be the same cycle.
Same cycle. Who's going to do it?
Yeah. So 2 years went by. 2019, a friend challenged me to release a book. And I joked to him by saying that by his 10th anniversary of his death, which was 2020, the book will be out. And then, as usual, I procrastinated again. But then, indeed, on his 10th anniversary, COVID had just struck the world. And so in April 2020, I did a tribute to him on Facebook, a 7-day tribute, where I picked up a few stories from the book and some personal ones, and wrote a tribute every day for 7 days in honor of him. the response was overwhelming. And that is how I realized that people hadn't really forgotten him and that his story is still relevant to Kenya. And I started the journey towards releasing it then in April 2020.
Right.
Yeah, so of course, along the way, there was lots of challenges here and there. I had to get a writer to help me. I got a writer. Now, the problem is that whereas the writer is a good writer, she did not really connect with the book the way I did. She's a novelist, and she also felt that maybe the book could be written like a novel. And so we clashed here and there along the way, but I still engaged her. She did her part. So in 2021, I got introduced to one of my WhatsApp groups. It was a WhatsApp group of old boys of our former school. This is a school that Kenyans love to hate, the Alliance High School, and it's a group that has former students across the years, and so it is at that point that I met one engineer, Isaac, just through the group. I realized he was someone who's into detail. He's very passionate on topics, well-read. And I quietly said to myself that this is the person I need to work with on this book. He didn't know it then. But then along the way, one day he asked to meet me. And I said, I'm going to seize this opportunity. And when we met, I asked him to have a look at the manuscript that I had at that time and tell me what he thinks. So when he came back to me a few weeks later, he just told me, you guys are joking. And I asked him, what do you mean? How is this book not out? You know? So he connected with the book in a way that I had. And I'm not sure, maybe he even connected more because he's someone who goes into detail, even in arguments in the group. And my dad was someone who was into detail. He's that guy.
He's that group member.
Yeah. So we then took it up, worked tirelessly between January and end of May this year to edit the work. And now this was a marathon job where we were now putting the book together, away from the novel style into what we have today. Yeah. So that's more or less the story of the book. When we were done, when I was working with him, I also engaged a few people to review the book for me, the manuscript. So that's how Professor PLO Lumumba came in, and he advised accordingly on a few things that I could change. And in the end, we managed to complete it.
Okay. So, Robert, you're looking at a book that, I mean, for all intents and purposes, before you picked it up, it was a manuscript.
Yes.
It was, thoughts put together by your father.
Yes.
Of his political life, of his family life, of his life in Kenya.
Yeah.
It was not complete.
Yes.
How then were you able to fill in the bits and pieces until it now became this finished?
Yeah, so that was a very tough thing to do. It was the hardest thing because, like you mentioned, it was a manuscript that wasn't complete. It was jumbled up. There were very many missing links. So I had to interview quite a number of people who lived with him. I interviewed my mom. I interviewed my stepmom, who's the older one in the family, who lived with my dad for very many years. And she really helped me in filling in gaps, and my mom as well. And then there were some things I just needed research also from the internet. So there's a lot of research that had to be done, missing dates, missing phrases that he needed to put there, missing names of people that he was referring to. And yeah, so by and large, the hardest part I could say was maintaining his voice. Because my dad had a very strong, powerful voice. And that was a challenge because when I worked even with Isaac over here, Isaac is from a younger generation than myself. And at times he'd use some words and I would tell him, no, that doesn't sound like a thing my dad would say. So that was one of the challenges that we had. But we struck middle ground at the end and we managed to succeed.
How about your siblings, especially the older ones, the ones who had interacted also more with your dad during his time in politics, his time in public service? When they read it, what did they feel?
Well, there were mixed reactions, I must say. Mixed reactions, which was expected. I had expected that from the word go, because remember, we had tried talking about the book years before. But there comes a time when the book speaks to you, and for me, it was a personal initiative where I could take in advice here and there, put in some you can ignore, some, but be ready to go on with what you've decided, because I put my mind out that I want this book out. And even the book, there's a very interesting passage in the book where my dad talks of living life on his own steam. That was something that really inspired me, that, I could not stop no matter what. Yeah.
Live on your own steam.
Yes.
Engineer Isaac Mutemi, so you
Yes,
worked
sir.
a lot on this book.
I did.
Had you read this history and the story of William Odongo Omamo before you started interacting with this manuscript?
So yeah, we're good. He actually asked me when I first, heard of the name Odongo Omamo, and it's one of those names that at least if you follow our news, it sounds like it's always been there. So for me, it was actually a task to go back and ask, okay, when did I first actually pay attention to this? And I realized it was during Kibaki's government, when the daughter was appointed ambassador. That's when the name started getting circulated. So then from that point, then I would go and Google, okay, who is this guy? Who is Odongo Omamo? So yeah, so that was the sort of, transient interaction I had with him, but I didn't have any detail. But I would say, which is actually how he and I started a conversation, I was very intrigued by the Luo factor in our politics. Because I think it's virtually impossible to critically engage in conversations in our politics. At least for me, I became politically aware in the 2002 elections. So it's not possible to engage with a political process and not have some understanding or have some insinuation about the Luo factor in our politics. So, and one of the questions I had actually asked, I think several months before he approached me in the group, I just asked a couple of guys, you guys, something puzzled me. We know why the Kikuyu were so actively involved in our politics. You can follow the thread and see how they came to be involved in politics. I can't say it's obvious to me that the Luo needed to be involved in our politics to the extent that they were. So that by independence, we have several charismatic and colorful and larger-than-life political actors on the scene whose main grievance wasn't very clear to me. So, and I couldn't trace that. So I asked a couple of guys, so could you point this to me? And then the answers I got were not very satisfactory, because they were trying to tie back to some of it was one of those explanations we used to give in history, they did this, but it didn't have that touch, like exactly how did it happen?
Why were they forming?
How did that political consciousness evolve? So that was something that I was completely open to. So when we started conversations, then he told me about this guy, and then I read it, and I realized it's actually someone who was a part of that movement. Then I was hooked.
It's very interesting that you talk about history. As you're speaking, what struck me was, my generation takes some of this information for granted because we lived through it. So you're speaking, I'm realizing, but this is part of the problem. The younger generation have never been taken through this process so that they could actually understand how the situation that we are in was arrived at, the path that was followed, and the players whose names one keeps reading about, what it is that they did, and what it is that the participation signified. You're told snippets, but you're not told the whole story. Because if you understand the whole story, then you'll understand why it is there came to be a problem between these two communities. And what are the salient points and what the issues were. Whether they were ideology, whether they were personal, all these things that people don't really talk about, you get to understand and realize, there actually really wasn't a problem as such between the communities. The problem was between two individuals who didn't quite see eye to eye on certain issues. Yes. But again, history has a way of doing something strange. Those who take power and maintain it will rewrite that history to suit their purpose. Yes.
Indeed.
And probably that's why a book like this, where someone is telling you and walking you through the experience, you get to say, oh, I see, so this person was there, so this is what actually happened. So this is what happened. I'm reminded of a book written by a gentleman who, before independence, he was very close to Pio Gamapinto, Fritz de Souza. Okay? If you read that gentleman's book, one of the things that you will find, let me just put it this way, it'll be amazing. I haven't read your father's book, and I'm sure when I read it, I'll be looking and saying, okay, so this is what this meant. Because anecdotally, someone will be able to tell you who said what when and how they said it and in what context. And that opened up a whole new world of understanding when it comes to understanding the history of our politics. Yes.
And if I may just respond to that before we go
Yes.
to Latif. It's true, that dilemma of handing over history
Yes.
is a big one. And because, I'll put it this way, there is the lived history, which is what you went through, which if you go through it, if you go through the experience, then it's yours. You own it, sort of. Nobody needs to introduce you to your own history. But the problem then gets in when you're talking about recorded history, because then recorded history, then, just the same way, if you live through history, there are things you'll emphasize. When you start recording it also, there are things you'll also choose to emphasize, which do not necessarily serve, your audience. And particularly in this past elections, for example, one of the conversations that came up is, how is it that the youth do not seem to have time for history? And if you try to win them over by talking about history, then you lose them and you lose their attention. And so I struggle with that phrasing, because I wouldn't really say I'm very young, but I would be younger than most. Falling in that category and, having, for me, it's not even a statement that needs to be made that should we take history seriously, because history is as irreplaceable as your name. Without history, there is no way of engaging with the present. There's no engaging with any sort of identity without history. It starts with history before it comes to you. So for me, it wasn't clear that it's a question of the youth not being interested in history, but more of how that history is sort of midwifed. That's where the clink starts showing.
The disconnects.
Correct.
Who was William Odongo Omamo? For very many people who, yes, they've heard about that name, they've heard Rachel Omamo in government, and they hear the father used to be, and other people who've interacted with people like you now. But who was William Odongo Omamo before politics and into politics?
Do you want to take a first crack at it?
Take it.
Well, William Odongo Omamo was, you could say, a village boy. He's someone who someone would call the hustlers, a true hustler, if so to speak. He was born in Sakwa, which is within Bondo, which was very harsh conditions back then amongst the peasant farmers. That's an area that has lots of snakes, flies were there back then, lots of mosquitoes. So it was a time when, to be alive, you were lucky to live long back then. Many of his contemporaries died along the way. He watched them die. He talks about that very clearly in his book. Actually, death is a big theme in his book, because he loses people who are very close to him early. And then he struggled for education. The struggle for education back then was real. His first day in school, he literally went there naked. He had no clothes. And that was the norm back then. And he struggled through, but someone held his hand, his uncle held his hand. And that's actually very important as well in the book. Like I said, what role does family play in one's successes in life? And in his case, he had his uncle, Senior Chief Robert Angawa, who named after, incidentally, who took him through, encouraged him to go to school. When he got to school, was the one who helped him when he got a scholarship to go to India, helped him to raise money to, for the travels to India, and was just a key advisor all through. But then back to Mzee. Mzee was a very humble man, I must say, because he was brought up in a close-knit family, extended family. That's how they grew up back then, with lots of cousins. living with them every now and then, I mean, in different places. And he was a man who, along the way, picked up oratory, which is remembered for. And that he did, you could say, in his Maseno High School days, where he was an ardent debater in the debating society. And he went on to keep on debating even when he was in India. And that, you could say, sharpened him and prepared him for politics. Yeah.
Brought him into that journey.
Yes.
You'll tell us about the journey in politics. We are talking about the late William Odongo Omamo, who is among very... You know, when you talk about the history of Kenya, you say, so-and-so was the first to do this on the other city.
Yes.
He was the first what?
Well, if you're talking about firsts, okay, let's bring something present. His daughter Rachel Omamo was the first lady chair of the Law Society of Kenya. Let's just start there. Then we go to the father.
And the first woman to be the defense minister in Kenya.
Yes.
Eh?
Then you go to the father. He was at that time principal of Egerton College. But in addition to that, he was the first African to actually get a master's in agriculture. So there are many firsts here. Yes.
And also
First
the
of
first
many.
to get a bachelor's in agriculture.
Yes.
So, yeah.
9:30. Let's take a quick break. Robert Omamo is a strategic planner, a commercial farmer. Engineer Isaac Mutemi is a politics and policy advisor. Both of them have worked together on this book. It's called The Path to Kaliech, the outside story of William Odongo Omamo. And that's what we're talking about this morning, what it's all about in this story of this outsized gentleman.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
We are talking about The Path to Kaliech, this book, The Path to Kaliech, the outside story of William Odongo Omamo, who, like City says, the first Kenyan African to get a bachelor's degree in agriculture,
And
a
a
master's degree in agriculture. First what again?
Principal of what we now know as Egerton University, was then a college. Yes.
That was teaching agriculture mostly.
Believe
then.
me, it's superior. What Egerton College did is what many universities would aspire to do. Yes, they didn't just teach it, they practiced what they taught, and they had the land to do what it is and the technology of the time and the facilities to actually ensure that by the time someone graduated from that college, you were proficient in whatever field of agriculture you had studied in. You were actually proficient. You knew what to do. Yes.
He was an astute debater as well, as his son Robert is telling us. Robert has worked very hard to getting this book out alongside engineer Isaac Mutemi. They are here with us in the studio telling us the story of this man from his career as a debater, as a teacher of agriculture, then getting into politics, where he also became a very big debater and very humorous as well. He's remembered this Kaliech word. I think did he call himself Kaliech?
No.
Who started using the word Kaliech on him?
So the name comes from a time when he was an agricultural officer working in South Nyanza in 1963. So the story goes, he gave a story to the farmers, the peasant farmers that he worked with back then, so he was trying to impact them to do things in a big way. Instead of doing small scale farming, he was trying to encourage them to engage in large scale farming. So the main cash crop at the time in South Nyanza was cotton, even though some people engaged in coffee farming. And he realized that you needed to grow at least 10 acres of cotton in order to get the same amount as someone who was growing 1 acre of coffee. So he gave them the story of a father and his two sons, where this father wanted game meat. So he gave each son a gun and 1 round of ammunition to go out hunting and bringing game meat. So the first son went out, didn't go too far, found a rabbit, shot it, and brought it back to his father. The second son went out hunting for Kaliech, an elephant. And so he eventually found an elephant late in the evening. He shot at it, but he missed. And he went back home, disappointed to his father. But he told his father that if he had an extra bullet, he may have killed the elephant. And with that, his father would have had enough game meat to last him months. So his father said he was proud of that second son, who was thinking big and wanted to satisfy his big appetite for game meat. So he blessed his son, and the good fortunes of the family followed him thereafter. So this story, he used this to demonstrate to farmers that you should stop thinking in a small way like a rabbit. You know, you should think like big, like an elephant. If you want to engage in farming, do bush clearing in a big way. Do cultivation in a big way. If you plant in a big way, market in a big way to get Kaliech results.
Right.
Go big
Elephant.
or go home.
Yes.
What is it about the people of Bondo and Risasi? Risasi ni moja.
So, and indeed then risasi ilikuwa moja as well.
Came back
Yes.
home and said, nipatie risasi ingine. Muone.
Yeah, so since he kept on repeating this story to the farmers over and over, they nicknamed him Kaliech because this was a story that resonated well with them. And it's from there that he picked up the name. And when he eventually joined politics, it so happened that he was large in size, so it also worked for him. But many people always assumed that the name was because of his size. Yet
me too.
the name was actually
Because of the story.
that he gave.
Many a conversation have we had in this room and talked about the importance of putting things down, that we don't do it enough, that the experiences of history of Kenya are told by external parties, that it is necessary for the history of our African nations to be told by Africans. So obviously this is a good example of what that can be with your help. I'm looking at something that was written then, and it said just after, I believe in the book at that time, there was, a sitting of friends together, a gentleman called Rateng that he sat with, and he then said, "It was amazing the way we were able to discuss various people, topics, events, ideas, and issues without the assistance of radio or TV sets, which were rare in Kenya at the time of the late 1940s. But we were able to discuss these topics amongst ourselves as communities." And so now that feeds into history that people will be able to read about today. It didn't matter who you were, it didn't matter where you were, so long as you were able to find some kind of cohesion as Kenyans, then conversations could flow. Now, this is a book that talks about the experiences of a man. What themes or what lessons do you think that those who read it today, for somebody who, is gone 12 years now, that they can pick up of now?
Could take that up. So I think, in a way, I'm appropriate person to talk about this because I came to this as an outsider, and I could say, okay, what grabbed me about this book before I became, an editor? It was just a reader who was reading through the manuscript, and I think, in essence, you could summarize it and say it's identity. The running theme in the story is identity, and identity at three levels. At the macro level, in which he talks about the Luo nation and the travels and the struggles and the challenges they're dealing with. At the meso level, where here I think I could talk about Maseno plays a very, very prominent role. And that's one of the things that I think I'll talk a little bit more about. And then at the micro level, where he talks about the relationship between him and his uncle, John Robert Angawa, was one of the most touching things for me in the story. And it gripped me because frequently when we reflect on our histories, at least pre-independence, there's sort of this notion that family ties, at least I come from an area where there's this assumption that family ties were weak before independence. And the sense of identity was not well structured across family. But John Robert, if you look at how he invested into Odongo, it was quite stunning. It was quite profound. And this is someone who was present at every stage of William's life. He talks about a major incident in his life. Wait for it, 2 lines later, and John Robert was saying this, Angawa was saying this. You talk about, so at every stop of the journey. And then the next part, of course, is Maseno. So why why it particularly gripped me that Maseno played such a prominent role in this story. The reason why actually he and I connected is I'm also pretty vocal about issues to do with Alliance and how Alliance engages with the society, engages with the community. And one of the things that I feel we miss out in society today is that, of course, there is that whole hype around I went to Alliance, which has taken a life of its own. But there's a missing element. At least it's something that is not frequently commented about there, which is how your socialization into education, into culture, into politics, how it forms you and how it shapes the person who you become. And this is this is largely irreplaceable. We talk about, and this matters whether you went to Alliance or you went to a nondescript school, how you're socialized into the education process, into the political process, it doesn't leave. And the problem is that that other part of what exactly is the experience of individuals in the education process, that doesn't really feature in our conversations. We're talking about the curriculum review right now, for example, and a lot of people are talking about the curriculum needs to be changed, what's wrong with the curriculum, the rich and poor, the divide between the rich and poor. One of the things I feel that is missing is the institutional memory that the schools that we have dotted all over the country, what is their response and how are they grappling with these changes that the education sector is coming to bring in? Because if you follow, I see he's laughing, and I'm not avoiding his laughing.
He's still stuck on nondescript.
I'm not really stuck on it because I don't think my brother here realizes just how much his allianceness has actually come to the fore. Because, and I was going to say that you think people who went to Alliance wax agreed about it. You should hear people who went to Maseno. You should hear.
And the reason, you see, the reason why I didn't want to, I apologize for apparently, being carried away by my whole went to Alliance thing, is I'm not. I appreciate, the pride and the hype around big name schools, but I sort of feel that it's possible to have pride without prejudice. And my problem with a lot of the conversations about, at least big institutions, is that it doesn't feel as though we are able to separate the pride from the prejudice. And that's something that I struggle with, because if you're coming to a public conversation, if you're coming to engage publicly with people from all walks of life, it matters that you can engage with them, from where they are, where they come from. Not that not this implication that if you come from XYZ, then your voice matters more than, somebody else's voice. And coming to Maseno, back to Maseno, and why, and what you see, for example, about Maseno, alumni being proud of the institution. If you actually read the history of how Maseno shaped both the trajectory of someone like Jaramogi Oginga Odinga and the wider politics of Luo Nyanza, their pride is, you can feel some justification for their pride. What I fear is lost in translation is that how do you translate the softer parts of your experience? Because one of the people who stand out in this book is Carrie Francis, for example, and there's an incident he talks about. Carrie Francis is a famous principal in pre-independence Kenya. He shaped both exactly. He shaped both Maseno
and a mathematician.
Correct. He shapes both Maseno and Alliance High School. And the place where Odongo talks about Carrie Francis, there's a paragraph he talks about the connection he had with Carrie Francis, which is a very personal thing. And someone mentions in passing, but now he's taking away the secrets of Maseno to Alliance. And Odongo's like, no, please, that doesn't matter. What matters to me is that this person connects with this institution as deeply as I do.
As I do.
That is what matters for me. Now, when we talk about what that ends up doing for individuals and how they end up interacting with the education process, we can have an entire session about that. there's a concept called the hidden curriculum, which deals with what lessons students draw from the education process that is not written down. The implicit curriculum, what is not explicitly written in the objectives of the school, in the objectives of the curriculum, that hidden curriculum is a monster in our education process, because we have a variety of institutions giving very variable interpretations for what students' place in the education process is. So yeah, I'm happy to take questions and we can engage in this conversation later on. But for me, the implication and the connection with the book is a lot more intimate. And one thing I love about William is that he didn't spare himself. He talks about his failures, his mistakes, his mishaps, his lucky breaks, almost to the point of scandal. He talks about, various points. I wouldn't spoil the book for readers, but he talks about, he bears his soul. He says, if I didn't get a lucky break here, that would have been the end of the road for me. If so-and-so didn't intervene for me here, that would have been the end of it for me.
If I hadn't made this mistake, the journey would have been different.
And if I hadn't been saved from this mistake by XYZ, then that would have been the end of my story. So it's not the typical airbrushed politician story who is, eager to talk about. And he was actually telling me after the book began serialization last weekend, someone actually got in touch with him that his dad had actually reached out. And one of the things that he had been very insistent about is that he didn't want anybody to edit the unflattering aspects of the story. Mm-hmm. He wanted everything out. It's like, don't touch my story. This is my story. I want it out there. And
it's interesting that you say that, because then here's a part as well that came out. So it was not brushed anything.
Yeah.
And so, this is, of course, in the middle of another conversation. While boosting the image of Kenyatta when he was still in detention, the very vocal freedom fighters like Tom Mboya, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, James Gishuru, and Walter Odede also had the audacity to say publicly that the detained Kenyatta was their political godfather. Jaramogi even went further to promote Kenyatta as his second god. The esteem with which Jomo was held after his release should be recorded minutely. His release in 1961 opened the floodgates for politicking, causing a very high tide of patriotism and nationalism. He said this.
He did. But you see, it is on record what Jaramogi actually said. It's paraphrased into, without Kenyatta.
No Kenyatta, no independence.
There's no independence, yes. But he explains it. And Jaramogi went to actually explain why it is that they were not going to make any moves until Kenyatta was
free.
Released. Yes.
What was the connection between William and the other larger-than-life then Luo leaders? There was Jaramogi on this side. There is Tom Mboya on the other side. Where did he fit?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think he was close to both. Jaramogi was his cousin, distant cousin, to the extent that Jaramogi even was his benefactor and helped him acquire a scholarship to go to India after Maseno. That is something that is actually not talked about a lot, because even one time when he praised Jaramogi for helping him, he got fired from cabinet.
Yes, he did.
And the story that has been said over and over is that Jaramogi and Omamo were enemies. There's the other story where they don't say too much about, where he actually got fired for praising Jaramogi. But then back to your question, he was also very close to Tom Mboya. When he was at Egerton, he got fond of Tom Mboya. And in fact, Tom Mboya was trying to help him secure another job after Egerton at the African Union in Ethiopia. But it then happened that Tom Mboya passed away in 1969 when my dad was actually meant to be moving on to this job that he was trying to secure. And it's when Tom Mboya passed on that his late wife, Pamela Mboya, while mourning with my dad, cried to him and told him, yes, your friend has fallen, take over. And it seems these words really touched him because even though he was late in the day, he actually eventually presented himself to run for MP of Bondo later that year. It just so happened that, that 1969 was a very tough time for the Luo nation, you could say, because we first lost the Foreign Affairs Minister, Agnes Kaliech, early in the year. Then we lose Tom Mboya. And then Jaramogi gets detained after the Kisumu incident of the opening of the Russian hospital. And so there was some sort of leadership vacuum that my dad felt he needed to fill. So he presented himself to run for the Bondo seat in 1969 as an independent. That's also another thing that's not talked about much. Back then, you could run as an independent. So there was a Kanu candidate who was Walter Odede. Surprisingly, that is Pamela Mboya's father. When she was asking him to take over, she didn't know that he would eventually run against her father. Yeah. So he ran against a KPU candidate as well. And when he won, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, in his own wisdom, picked him as a minister for natural resources. Now, it's at that point that now him and Jaramogi end up starting to have issues because he was a victim of circumstances, you could say.
So it appears like Mzee is using him to spite Jaramogi.
You could say that to some extent.
I've picked this guy from your own backyard.
But you see, the thing is that my dad was his own man. He was a qualified man, very qualified. I think, to be fair to Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, he was also trying to appease the Bondo people that I've given you someone, even though Jaramogi is in detention.
At least one
there's
of your
someone
own
else,
sons.
yeah, who is also equally qualified to run. So it then happens that or my dad, Omamo, gets caught in between the problems that Jaramogi and Kenyatta had.
Actually, but there was also the narrative that was felt then that he was taking over the mantle that Jaramogi had. Now, there were those who propagated that particular narrative. Yet, if you look at history, that really wasn't the case. Yeah. He wasn't planning, he wasn't taking over as such. He was filling a gap.
Yes.
Because if Jaramogi was in detention, somebody had to be MP.
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, I could go further and say that Jaramogi and Omamo were different ideologically. When Jaramogi served as MP for Bondo in the first years of independence, he was a more outbound-looking MP. He was a vice president, so a lot of his things happened outside Bondo.
It happened nationally.
Nationally.
Yes.
And my dad mentions in the book, now the difference with him is that even though he became a minister, he was a more inbound-looking MP. So all his things he did in Bondo. He was always doing development things. So, it was a stark contrast from Jaramogi, who would do things outside the constituency. But now there's this person here who every weekend...
Who is dealing with the local.
Is dealing with the local people.
Wouldn't you say that the same thing has been said of Jaramogi's son? Because there are those who argue, what is this man doing for his backyard? And yet nationally,
Yes.
he's acclaimed. I mean, he's beyond compare, if you ask me. The
Yes.
things that are accredited to Raila, it would be very difficult to find somebody who could actually lay claim to similar achievements.
That is very true. I agree. To some extent, Raila was similar to his father. And I think the new constitution in 2010 did us a great service in seeing to it that someone who runs for president doesn't run for MP. Because Raila is also...
He's serving a national constituency.
Serving nationally. Yeah.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for coming. As you conclude, just briefly, how does one get a copy of this book?
Yes, so the book is available in leading bookshops, Textbook Center, Bookstop, Yaya Center, and then it's also available on online platforms like nuriakenya.com, who are actually very efficient in delivering books to your doorstep.
Okay.
And then there's also rafubooks.com. And anyone who has a problem could also reach out to me on my email, bobomamo254@gmail.com.
bobomamo254
at gmail.com.
Yes. Robert, thank you very much for coming, and congratulations to both of you and Engineer Mutemi for finishing this book and for releasing the book. And let's enjoy the story.